Councillor Graham Latty's last planning meeting. And as is becoming the custom now, we have a few buns to pass out amongst yourselves at the appropriate time. Baked again by Andrea. Again, she insisted on baking it. She sends her best regards to Pat. She was very fond of Pat when they were both councillors together. And she hopes you have a very happy retirement. If that's a word we could associate with you, Graham, I'm sure it's not. I'm going to do the usual thing, Graham. I'm going to say a few words and I'll ask anybody who wishes to say a few words, and then we can have a buns and maybe have a photograph up at the back. Okay. As far as I know, Graham, you've been on planning, city plans panel since it started up, since its inception, all the way through. Is that right? About 6 months after it started. Oh, okay. And you have chaired on occasion for Amanda Carter, have you not?
Yes, I chaired it for about 6 months.
Yeah.
6, 7.
I believe so, yeah. I believe so when it started, yeah. But you've been a real boon. You've been a real bonus to us. You've gone into it in great depth. We certainly discovered roofscapes over you and chimneys. I'm afraid that might cease a little bit or slow down now that you won't be here. But you can always write to us and remind us, your input would be very welcome. So maybe we can find a suitable chimney to name after you in recognition of all your hard work. I know that one. I was going to mention that when we looked at the university library and we went and have a look at it, and a magnificent building inside, much better than outside. And they had an art display and they chose to highlight the industrial past of the area. So they had like a tower chimney. And we're all saying, that's really good. That's really. And Graham said, I don't like it. I don't like it. We were all taken back. Here was a chimney, that, and he was very much a chimney man. And he didn't like it. But I'm going to finish there anyway, Graham. I've spoke too much, but we will miss you. Your contribution and your sound common sense was always welcome. And I think you're a good example to people who often think that planning is political. It's not political. It's like-minded, dedicated people who's trying to achieve the best development for our city. And I hope we'll continue to do that always, even after you're not sat on the chair there. I'd normally ask you to speak at this time, but Colin, long you serve, do you want to say a few words?
Well, I suppose I always regarded Graham as the patriarch of the panel, that wise, grey-haired individual who kept us more or less on the straight and more or less on the narrow. I think when you sit on Pan's panel, you know that certain people who come along to Pan's panel are euphemistically called planning nerds. I would regard them as committed to the principles that I think we're trying to uphold, which is basically good design, quality developments. And I think Graham epitomises that attitude to the planning process. And I know we've had many a discussion among the details of some schemes, and I'm not going to mention chimneys more than that once, because everybody else is bound to do it. But the bottom line is, I think it's that Graham's attention to detail, which has meant that many of the developments that we agreed through Plans Panel have been much better for that close scrutiny. He is still, I was going to say was a councillor, he's still a councillor for a neighbouring ward to myself. And on a personal note, we've always got along very well together. I think we've understood the limitations of being councillors, we've understood the boundaries, and we've cooperated on more than one occasion. And I think the cooperation epitomises how you can do the best for a community, because effectively we represent a single community, Airborough. And by that cooperation and that working together, I think we produced a better result, I suppose, for our community. I will actually greatly miss Graham. I'll greatly miss his comments on plans. I'll greatly miss meeting it. Well, no, I won't miss you meeting in Waitrose, will I? Because you'll still be going shopping. So we used to meet on the down the cereal aisle and have a conversation about something that topped up. Graham, can I say from my point of view, and I think from everybody's point of view, thank you for all the time and effort you put in, not just to this panel, but to the council and to Airborough. I feel we will be the poorer for you leaving.
Thank you, Colin. Can I call on David now, please?
Right, thanks, Chair.
We are.
To keep the meeting going till 5 o'clock.
Yeah, that's necessary, isn't it? Yeah. I've got to say, it'll be a great loss to us. You leaving the council, Graham. You've always been very good. In fact, I've been on this committee apart from 1 year since it started, and Graham's been on most of that time as well. It's great working with Graham. We might not always agree, but the fact of the matter is where we disagree, we do it in a way that's proper and right. And his company on site visits has been great, good fun. In fact, I remember many months ago a particular site visit, and bus didn't turn up, so we finished up doing it in 2 cars. And in Graham's car, there was Graham, a Conservative, me, a Green, and I forget all the other, 1 Labour and 1 Liberal Democrat. And you would have thought we were all of the same political position where we acted in that car. But it's part of that is Graham, because he's the same with everybody. He's a really nice bloke, and he does his job in such a sort of kind and generous way. As I say, he'll really be missed. I know a few weeks ago, not the last one because I was ill last planning meeting, but it must have been planning meeting before that. And we're out on site visits, and he says to me, will you keep your eyes on chimneys for me? So I says, I'll do my best. Anyway, best for your future, Graham. I hope you're going all right, but you'll be missed. Thank you.
Anybody else? Maybe Caroline, you'd like to say a few words, but please chip in if you want to say something. And then I'll bring in John on behalf of our planning officers, and we'll ask you to say a few words, Graham, if that's okay.
Yes, I would like to say just a few words, Graham. I'm sorry it's your last meeting, and you really will be missed from this panel. As previous colleagues have said, you've made a great contribution to it. And I first met you when I was very, well, completely new to this game. And the reports that I was given read like a foreign language, and I really didn't understand the framework or anything. As a new councillor, I just didn't know what I'd let myself in for. And you have always been very generous in your understanding and acceptance of people who are perhaps not as experienced as you are on Plants Panel. And I feel that you helped my journey through. It wasn't very long after I had become a Plans Panel member that I did become aware that your previous occupation was a sculptor. And ever since I've known that information, it's made the things that you say have made perfect sense. And it's actually helped my understanding a lot. And we are, I think, a kindred spirit on design matters as well. I do think about a visit that we went on together with the city plans, and we were walking across the bridge at the Stitch at Kirkstall Forge. And I was looking at the bridge and thinking, I wonder what Graham makes of this. And you turned around and said to me, it looks as if somebody's thought about it. And that's very typical of the kind of comments and contribution that you would make. And it's certainly shaped my thinking, Graham. So thank you from me, and you will be a huge loss to the panel.
Thank you, Caroline. Paul, please.
I mean, I speak for our group. I believe 30 seconds ago, my chief whip said I'm to speak for the group. But that's one thing that Graham doesn't have on planning. He doesn't have any political loyalties on planning, and Graham does take that absolutely down the line, and it's all about design. And quite often when I've been on plans with Graham, I'll be driving in and I'll think, what should I think about that? What should I think about this? I'll just ask Graham before the meeting starts. And of course, should I survive onto this panel for the next year, I won't be able to do that. So I guess I will drive down thinking, shall I ask Graham? And then find he's not here and think I can't ask Graham. So it's going to be a big loss for me personally. Obviously, I'm losing a ward colleague and a friend as well. I will, Graham, try to keep chimneys alive for you. We have certain chimneys in our ward which we don't always quite agree on. So it's not always agreeing, but I think we have agreed to disagree on those chimneys. But as I say, I really will miss Graham and we'll miss his humour and his detail on design, because you can guarantee when Graham wants to speak, it will be about design. And I think probably as Caroline says, that's his artistic talents. I didn't quite realise he was a sculptor. He's kept that under his under his wings a bit, but I know he does have very artistic talents, and that does tend to come through in the design. So you will be greatly missed, Graham, as you know, on many fronts. But I'm just conscious that you're not going completely away, and I'm sure we shall meet around the town and you will say, but by the way, you should do this and you should do that. So maybe there'll be more influence than you think. But thank you for your assistance to both myself and Dan during your time on council, really. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Anybody else, or shall I ask John to come in and say a few words? John, please.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just on behalf of officers, I think we'd probably want to reflect all of the comments that have been mentioned already, and just to reiterate how helpful the advice and comments, sometimes not agreeing with what we've put forward as officers, but it's always been delivered in a courteous and respectful way of the officer opinion, which is much appreciated. Clearly strong on design, which goes way beyond chimneys, it must be said. You've always looked at all aspects of development beyond roofscapes. We've really appreciated that input, and it really has helped to make a big contribution to this panel and also to the city and the development of the city in our view. So thank you very much for those contributions, and hopefully we'll be able to, somebody else might pick up the mantle from panel, I'm sure they will. Thank you very much.
No, no, you get the final word, Graham. So please now have your right of reply, as you put it.
Thank you. Well, just put one thing straight. The sculptor bit. I was a sculpture student at the College of Art across in Vernon Street a very, very long time ago. And up to a national diploma standard level. But I never practiced as a sculptor in the terms of making money out of it. There weren't enough people making money out of it, sort of thing. But no, just to get that bit straight. But I always thought that my time as a student did leave me with a strong feeling of what I liked in terms of design. And just to getting design out of the way, with planning, all I ever want is to leave Leeds a place that in the future, 50 years time, people will look back and say they didn't do a bad job, you know, that we left something, rather than some of the things we've got from the 60s and 70s where we all look around and say, for God's sake, well, how did that happen? And probably people will look back at the stuff that we've accepted as well and say the same, because design tastes change, don't they? But I have city plans has been my favourite, as you might say. It's what I was on council for in lots of ways. That's one or two other things, but that's always been the strongest thing. And I think also this business about politics, what the heck has politics got to do with design, with the council? What has politics got to do with being a councillor? I've never believed that when we're doing our job, it matters a damn whether we're Conservative, Labour, Liberal or what, you know. We're just people trying to do something for the great unwashed out there and leave it a better place for them. So thank you very much for all the very kind words that have been said. I'm sure I can't live up to those, but I've enjoyed all your company. I'm going to miss it like old Nick, but you've got to go sometime, and I'm going. Thank you very much.
Can I invite you to go and have a bun before we start? And as we did last time, we might get a group photograph for Graham's memory box. But can I remind you, Graham, that we're in Purda now, and we don't want to see that appearing on Tory leaflets during the election time. Okay. Okay. Okay, members, if we can get back to the business we're here to do. Just to remind you, if you don't know, Graham, that was live streamed. But I think there's a little problem with the sound, but you'll be able to see it. Is that right? Come in and tell us.
I was just letting you know that all the cameras were still on while we were adjourning for the photograph, but all the mics were off.
Moving on then. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the meeting of the City Plans panel. My name is Councillor Jim McKenna, and I will be chairing today's meeting. Could I remind everybody that today's meeting is being streamed on the City Council website so that the public can observe the meeting without needing to be present. City Plans panel deal with applications from the city centre as well as the largest and most significant applications the council receive. The aim of the panel is to hear all the relevant information from applicants, members of the public and council officers to help members of the panel make their decision. Could I now invite members and officers to introduce themselves and mute your microphones once you have done so. If I could start on my left, with Daljit, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Daljit Singh. I lead the City Centre planning team.
Good afternoon, Steve Littlejohn. I'm the planning case officer.
Hello, Gillian McLeod, Transport Development Services Manager.
Good afternoon, Councillor Elizabeth Nash, representing Hunslet and Riverside.
Councillor Walshaw, heading in Hyde Park.
Councillor Peter Carlill from Carvelling Farsley Ward.
Councillor Caroline Gruen, Bramley and Stanningley Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Al Garthwaite, Headingley and Hyde Park Ward.
Good afternoon, Toby Russell, Senior Technical Officer.
Good afternoon, Daniel Loomer, Senior Technical Officer.
Good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Dan Cohen from the Woodley Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Paul Wadsworth from Guiseley Road and Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor David Blackburn, Farley and Wortley Ward.
Good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Colin Campbell.
Councillor Graham Latty, Guiseley and Rawdon for another 14 days.
Stephen Varley, Design Officer.
Debbie Oldham, Clerk to the panel.
Good afternoon, Matthew Hills, Legal Officer.
Good afternoon, Adam Harvat, Group Manager for Policy and Plans.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Carr, Head of Development Management.
Thank you for that, members and officers. Moving on to the agenda, could I ask the clerk to go through agenda items number 1 to 5, please?
Thank you, Chair. Under agenda item number 1, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Agenda item 2, there are no items which require the exclusion of the press or public. Agenda item 3, there are no late items of business that I'm aware of. Agenda item 4, could I ask members to declare any interests? And I'll take silence as there are none. And under agenda item 5, there's no apologies received, Chair. Thank you.
Again. Can we move on then to minutes of the previous meeting held on the 24th of December? And it commences on page 5. If I can go through them quickly page by page, you can stop me if you have a comment. Starting with page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, and finally page 11. Are members prepared to move that as a correct record? Okay. Are there any matters arising? Can we see in favour of a correct record? Sorry, I moved on quickly. Yeah, I think that's unanimous. Thank you. Any matters arising? If not, then can we move on to agenda item 7? Can I invite Stephen, please, to come in and present this application to us, please?
Thank you, Chair. So we have a hybrid application for up to 1,437 dwellings, associated commercial uses on ground floor to be delivered in 11 blocks with up to 14 townhouses, including landscaping, 362 student units, infrastructure including river wall and a new footbridge and cycle bridge. So the site itself, members hopefully will recall the site from visit last year. It came in at pre-application stage, known as the former City Reach site, just off Kirksall Road, just west of Leeds City Centre. So just to put the site into context, looking eastwards towards the city centre, you can see that the site is bounded by the River Aire to the south and the Kirksall Road to the north, and the land forms part of a larger strip which is gradually being brought forward for development of a similar type of proposal with city-scale type of blocks providing residential and a mix of commercial as well. Site itself is a brownfield site, formerly industrial site, 4.9 hectares in size. There are some commercial uses on the western boundary which would be demolished as part of the application. And the application would include some remediation works, obviously, for the former industrial elements that may well be left underneath the surface. Plus, there's going to be infrastructure works to the side of the river with a new river wall. Just to remind members of the previous scheme known as City Reach 1 and 2, that was brought forward with a sort of an east-west split. The detailed application or reserve matters came in for the eastern side, and the outline permission for the western side, delivering 9 blocks of apartments. The current proposal takes that another step further. Again, the east-west split divides the hybrid application. So the western side, the eastern side, is the detailed part of the scheme, and that proposes to bring forward 5 blocks of housing, 1 block of student accommodation, and 3 low-rise commercial buildings. And it also includes 4 townhouses, along with significant landscaping, the riverside walk and the new bridge that to be provided at detailed stage. Outline stage, it's proposed another 5 blocks with obviously final details to be agreed. In terms of the heights, it ranges from 8 to 17 stories, 11 blocks altogether. As you can see, the the landscaping is quite significant at the riverside, with a park area which provides a reasonable standoff between this development and the Otter Island development to the south, which is a lower rise residential scheme. Just to show inside the site, the lower rise buildings mixed with open spaces, along with residential type streets, kind of show that it works on a human scale, with a variety of heights and a diverse massing and use of materials. In terms of the overall design and the use of materials and the colour palette, it's drawn from Leeds' industrial heritage, and would be applied in a variety of ways over the different blocks, so that each block would have its own character. But it would also have a kind of coherence over the whole, with the similar types of materials, reflecting the local area. This would be from the Kirksall Road frontage, facing away from the city centre. So two taller buildings would provide a gateway into the site, and that would lead into the public square area, where people could then work their way through the site to the park and open spaces next to the river. In terms of commercial uses, all of the ground floors will be put to different uses. Flexibility is asked for, so that the appropriate uses can be found within the general use classes, depending on circumstances at the time. The only restriction really that we'd put on would be for retail, to limit the amount of retail, so that it's not all shops. In terms of landscaping, overall it will be divided into different character areas. So you've got the public square area to the north, and more of a leisure play area to the south, with formal and informal play spaces, recreation spaces. Also lots of opportunity for planting and creating biodiversity net gain, along with sustainable drainage in terms of planting, soft landscaping, and provision of some wetland areas with swales and other drainage features. In terms of parking and access, there'll be two access points from Kirksall Road. There'll be vehicular access east to west for service vehicles and local vehicles. Overall, there'll be 295 parking spaces, most of which will be provided at outline phase, with 41 spaces being provided at detailed phase. Which ties into the hope within the application of providing good access to alternative means of transport, with a cycle hub being provided, which would provide storage and rental space, along with other facilities for cyclists, hopefully bringing together the various cycle routes within the locality, providing access south of the river, back up the A65 and also into town. Just a note on wind. It's obviously been assessed for wind impacts, and some mitigation is required in terms of canopies and screening, but nothing too significant. The design of it could be looked at by condition prior to construction. So, with regard to the overall housing provision, members will be aware that the applicant is a subsidiary of Clarion Homes, who are a social housing provider. And there is the intention to provide a high level of affordable housing, 35%. But because of the way that the funding is being provided, it's not, the 35% can't be controlled by the council within the planning permission. Only 7% can be within our control under the Section 106 agreement. We have had comfort that the funding is in place, and we're satisfied that this level of affordable housing can be provided. It just,
it'd be better if you could speak into the microphone rather than to the front, because even I am struggling.
Sorry, I do apologise. Is that better? Sorry, is that better?
Oh, speak.
Yeah, so the level of affordable housing is 35%, with 7% controlled by the council. The applicant has agreed to revisit the mix of affordable housing, which currently is within the Section 106 element. It's just one bedroomed properties, but that's so that the overall delivery can be provided with the funding that's being provided by Homes England. So there is comfort that can be revisited in the event that the funding couldn't be provided for the 35% affordable housing. In terms of the overall mix, what's being provided would be largely one-bed properties, 52% one-bed, 47% two-bed, and within the detailed phase, 3% three bedrooms, which would increase to 7% outline phase, which would bring the whole to 5%. The applicant is willing to look at the outline phase separately and to increase that provision to 10%, subject to further housing needs assessment, and we can condition that in. And just to finish on the outstanding issues, that's just an image of the river wall there. The council, as members will be aware, is building a new flood defence. And there are some outstanding issues with the Environment Agency regarding hydraulic modelling. So the recommendation that officers are putting forward is to approve in principle, defer and delegate final decision, subject to resolution of outstanding matters relating to flood risk, and finalisation of conditions in the Section 106 agreement. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, for that presentation. Now, we can go on now to questions to officers. We do have a number of technical people here from the developers, Susan Yates, Tony Wilshaw and Christopher Darley, and it may well be that some of your questions will be to them, so we can certainly call them forward. But in the meantime, can we put questions to officers? Councillor Campbell, please.
Well, someone's got to start. This may well be for the developers, but two elements that stand out to me initially are the townhouses, of which there appear to be one block of, is it 4? And it just seems a little incongruous given the rest of the site, which is quite substantial blocks. And I just wondered why we'd pick 4 townhouses to drop in that location, because I thought, given the location, given what else is going around it, perhaps something a bit more adventurous might be more appropriate. And the second question relates to B2C, which I think is what it's called on one of these drawings, which is the low-rise building adjacent to B2A and B5B, if you've got the appropriate plan. And from the artist's impression, it just looks a bit like a shed to me. And I was just wondering why, again, in design terms, why effectively we were dropping what looks like a shed in the middle of what is a high-rise development. And it would seem to me that we perhaps could do a little better on the design front.
Colin, they do seem.
I've got one more as well. Sorry, the one that I usually ask at this point. I appreciate that there's limited parking on this development, and there will be limited parking, and there should be limited parking. The concern I always express at this point is how do we physically stop people driving in there and parking either on the pavement or on the road, or part on the road, part on the pavement. So what physical measures are in place?
Thank you for that, Colin. It seems to me that apart from the highways one, it's best answered by the developers and technical people who sat over there. So can I invite the relevant people to come forward, please? Okay, I'm sure you heard clearly Councillor Campbell's comments. Please answer them to the appropriate person. If you would introduce yourself before you start speaking, it would be helpful as well. Thank you.
There we go. Right. Thank you. Hi, good afternoon. I'm Richard Cook. I'm Group Development Director, Executive Director for Clarion Housing Group, and Latimer's our subsidiary, which is looking to develop this project. On my right, I've got Mike Briffett, who is our Project Director for the Kirkstall Road project. And on my left,
Luke Walter, Broadway Mallion architect.
Okay, so I'll let Luke answer the conversation around the makerspace and the low-rise building in the middle first, because Luke's led our master plan on this for us. So Luke, you go first.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, I mean, both really good questions, to be honest. And obviously, we've been looking at this design for 2 years, and these aspects that you've raised have really developed about character and quality of space. So you mentioned about the sort of challenges in sort of taller, dense developments there, and then how you sort of really at street level engage with those developments. So firstly, if I talk about the townhouses, primarily they were introduced as a way to really try and capture the sort of residential quality that we were trying to look at in that area. You know, how tall buildings come to ground and how you engage with them on that sort of scale as a person, as an individual. And what we looked at was a way of kind of using smaller buildings to kind of break that scale up and engage with it, but use it in a way that would also remove some of the sort of closing off of spaces. So in terms of if you're higher up in one of the wings, you actually see over the townhouses, but it really was about that residential central spine. So as mentioned there in the planning framework agreement originally set out, there was this sort of central route through the scheme. I think very early on with our client, we looked at that sort of route and really wanted to promote it as a community residential space. And through the sort of development and working with your officers, you know, one of the sort of key elements to that was that sort of activity along that street and trying to create, you know, architecture design that would respond to that nature and that people would treat it and respect it in that way. And so the sort of townhouses along that central route was a response to that, that we hope you feel sort of quite successfully achieve it. You do make a good observation in terms of phase one, the detailed design application. There are only 4 townhouses within it, but within the wider master plan in the outline, they sort of continue along that route to kind of create that character I spoke to. If that's suitable, I'm happy to talk in a bit more detail or specifically around that.
Chair, it might help if we had the drawing up on the screen, and perhaps if we're talking about going through the site, it might be useful to.
I think the image is quite helpful actually. There's a computer image we've got for that might put in imagery. I think it's a bit further on, wasn't it?
Slide 10.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. So what I've tried to describe is sort of hopefully conveyed in that image, which is, you know, I talked about character, the sense of it being a residential activation. And when you've got sort of tall buildings, I think this is hopefully a good way of actually creating that sense. Yeah. Is it more directed around the sort of change in scale between, you know, people, you know, and how they live there and things like that?
Well, I think, you know, as you say, phase one includes 4 townhouses,
yeah,
which it seems a little incongruous. I can see that from what you're saying to us that there is a rationale behind the work. I suppose slightly cynically, I'll say that I think when you get to phase 2, it will be a different drawing to this, because it always is. But I need to think about that, looking at this artist's impression, because it looks like a terrace with some quite large buildings in the middle of each every so often. I just need to have a think about that.
Okay.
Would you like to comment on what I describe as the shed? It looks a bit like a shed on the artist's impression. It is, which I think is the bar, isn't it? Yeah.
So again, this is another a very good point to raise, and again something we've sort of spent a lot of time sort of trying to develop. I think really, I mentioned before about townhouses, the inclusion of the lower buildings was really something with our client we've worked quite closely with about how you engage again at that ground floor space. And I think one of the other things mentioned, you know, we talk about flexibility and sustainability, you know, and we really sort of took that brief from the client and considered how do we create spaces that you can over time change and adapt. So there was this sort of iteration of design that sort of really grew to kind of create, how do you make spaces that you can have multiple different uses over a period of time that are very flexible, efficient, and work well. And as you point out, you know, the sort of response is as you call it, a shed, which actually meets that brief really well. And I think if you being true to the sort of character of the area, we've really tried to sort of ground it in the history that came before on this site in the response. So creating a kind of new industrial architecture. So it relates to the character in the sort of brick and industrial nature, but gives it new life and new openings and new flexibility. So we quite enjoyed celebrating that aspect of it in a sort of slightly different way, in providing those spaces. We love sheds, I suppose, is the summary of that comment. It's just how we view it. Yeah.
Industrial heritage.
Yeah.
Luke, thanks for that. Good afternoon, everyone. I think just a couple of other points to add to what Luke has just said. The first phase is in itself a significant phase of development. And we've sought to introduce a number of community spaces through the amount of commercial space that we're creating at ground floor level, not just to be there for the residents of the development, but also to engage the wider community. So community buildings are a central part of what we're trying to achieve here. And that's not just about the development community, it's also about the wider community. So lots of flexible spaces like the ones that you can see on the slide there, the food hall, in the middle, the maker's space on the right, and then to the north of that, we've also got the cycle hub.
Thank you for those answers. Colin, does that satisfy you at the moment? I'm sure you'll come back.
I understand their rationale for it. I'm not sure I quite agree with it, but
oh, there was something on parking as well, wasn't there?
The parking. So that we ultimately will be managed by a management company. Yep. So it'll be controlled to stop non-residents with parking, just accessing and abandoning cars in the scheme. Yep. So it'll be a controlled scheme.
Well, I mean, we've agreed that the roads won't be adopted and there will be the management company. When you say controlled, my understanding is it will be an open access from Kirkstall Road.
Correct.
So not controlled in that way, but
it's
controlled within the site.
Proactive management process. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Can I bring in Kaylee now, please?
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, so I would like to know how you've come about your housing needs assessment with the with the number of 1 beds and the lack of 3 beds. It's only at 5%, isn't it? And also in the social housing provision, there's no % 3 beds, which is a big concern for me.
I'll just start and then I'll hand over to Susie from Lichfields. So there's probably quite a lot to get into here. I'll start with some of the overall numbers and the rationale for the mix. There's 503 affordable homes across the whole site. There's 101 of those that are part of the Section 106, and then another 403 homes that are delivered through the grant funding from Homes England. The strategic housing needs assessment that we undertook showed that there was a demand in the area for the smaller units, so the 1 and the 2 bed units, and that was backed up by our own housing needs analysis. So we, as much as we've developed a mix that reflects what we believe the demand in that particular area is. Do you want to just add to that, Susie?
Hi. Yeah, I'm Suzanne Yates from Lichfields, and Lichfields prepared a housing needs assessment that was submitted as part of the application. There's a number of factors that have factored into the housing mix that you see before you, which, as you rightly point out, is a predominance of 1 and 2 bed properties. We're obviously in a very central location here, where the demand is geared towards apartments, and the Leeds SHMA demonstrates that there is the demand for flats outstrips the demand for housing and the demand for larger scale units. So the provision is geared towards that. We're also in a central location where we are trying to achieve a dense, high density scheme. And that again lends itself towards flats and apartment buildings for which there is identified demand. The SHMA again talks about a shortfall of 1, 2 and 3 bed flats, which the scheme accommodates and provides. Also, given that we are providing such a high level of affordable housing, that in itself directs the scheme towards the smaller scale properties. So 1 and 2 bed units are in their nature more affordable. And so that's also had an effect on the scheme. We do nevertheless still have a number of 3 bed units in the scheme. And I think it's a contribution of 73 in total, which whilst a fairly low proportion on the site, is still a significant contribution to the number of 3 bed properties within the fringe area of the city. And we, as Steve alluded to earlier, we have accepted a condition whereby we will look to provide 10% 3 bed within the outline phase, which will bring the total provision of 3 beds across the scheme to 7%. But overall, the approach is in line with the approach adopted through the relevant policy and also adopted elsewhere in these kinds of locations.
So it's literally like a 5-minute walk from the Burley Lodges and from the Rosebank Primary School. And there's a lot of family housing all around there, like lots of families live around there. So I don't understand how you've come up with, oh, in this location, like what was the net that was cast? Are you going with the city centre, or are you going with the actual area surrounding the site?
I don't think it's not necessarily a case of looking at the catchment of the area and what kind of accommodation is available nearby. This site has obviously had planning permission previously for high density residential development. It's allocated for a significant number of properties within your local plan, and it's intended to deliver a high number of housing and to address housing need, but also affordable housing need. So we have sought to maximise the delivery of housing on this site. So it's not a low density family led scheme. It is a high density scheme which incorporates a predominance of 1 and 2 bed apartments, but also some 3 bed properties, which allows for people to move within the area if they're looking to move to a larger property, but does, as I say, reflect the characteristics of the site and is justified with reference to the housing needs assessment.
Okay, but if there's no larger properties available to move into, where are people supposed to move into? Like that's what I don't understand, because there are bigger properties in the immediate vicinity. So I mean, in the report it's saying the inner area is dominated by 1 and 2 bed apartments, but it like so what I'm saying is what sort of catchment area are you using for this to identify need? Because like on the one hand you're saying, you know, we're going to provide what's already available, and on the other hand you're saying but also we're not, because there's a demand for it. I don't understand. I just don't understand.
I'll try and answer the question. I can't specifically answer the question in terms of the catchment. What I'll try and address is how we've come up with the mix. The challenge that we've had here is that, you know, there are significant costs involved in developing the infrastructure to allow us to build out this scheme with this level of affordable homes. So we've concentrated on a number of things, building as many affordable homes as we can, because that's our core purpose. Putting in place the right level of infrastructure and green space and public open space, and balancing that against the sort of the commercial realities of development and the funding that we've got available to us. That's a really difficult balance, and what we've tried to achieve is the best possible mix that we can in terms of 1, 2 and 3 beds, and there are 73 3 beds across the site, and deliver all of that infrastructure. And create a scheme which is as inclusive as it possibly can be. So I take your point generally about 3 beds. What I can say to you is we work very hard to try and come up with a sustainable scheme overall, both from a design point of view, but also from a commercial point of view.
Thank you.
So,
It might be
sorry,
worth bringing
Chair, can I
Adam
come
in
back
at this
in?
stage. Adam, do you want to say a few words, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes. I think, I mean, it's clear, obviously, that the work that the applicants have done in terms of addressing policy H4 in this case. I mean, Councillor Brooks is right, obviously, that this doesn't meet the targets that are set out in the table H4, but the explanation and the logic that's set out in the housing needs assessment as provided by Lichfields does go through some of the detail and rationale of that. It's one of the elements that's in the planning balance in terms of the strengths of the scheme, as Mr. Briffett sets out there. So from an officer's point of view, I think it's fairly clear that it is not in accordance with the targets as set out in the table H4. However, we are satisfied with the detail that's provided within the housing needs assessment, given the limitations and challenges and constraints that are experienced on this site, but also recognising that this is a very, very challenging issue that members have raised a number of times, and that more work across the city needs to be done to ensure that we've got a greater contribution of 3 beds, particularly in the city centre area.
Thank you, Adam. Kaylee, is that okay? Can we move on? Final word, maybe?
I feel like my question still hasn't been answered in terms of what area has been used to identify what the need is. Because if it's the immediate local area, that's very different to the city centre, and that question hasn't been answered, Chair.
Okay. Do you have an answer, does anyone?
Come in if you don't. You
Yeah.
want me to come in? Okay.
Sorry, it's me.
Suzanne and Mike can correct if my understanding is wrong, but if the analysis has been based on the SHMA, that's the Strategic Housing Needs Assessment, which was carried out by the council in preparation of the development plan and then updated in 2017, then the area, Councillor Brooks, is wider than just the immediate local area. It will include parts of what most people would regard as a proper city centre on the other side of the inner ring road. Having said that, as Adam has said, we've looked at the housing needs assessment. It is a mixed picture in this area. It isn't all family housing. There is a strong character of flatted development, and we accept the findings of the housing needs assessment. The other point, in addition to the point that Mike and Adam made about taking this single issue in the wider context and in balance with the other benefits of the scheme, the other point I would make is that our policy, although there's a preferred target for 3 beds, and I'm sure I made this point before, does allow for local needs and local character to be taken into account. That is expressly in the policy, and not just this applicant, but others do come to us often in the city centre to take into account local character. Now, as Adam has said, and as members have made clear previously, we are looking at that. But until that policy is revised, that is a policy we have to work with. So I'm advising members that that's the context within which we considered this matter. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dal, just for that further explanation. Can I move on then and bring in Councillor Garthwaite at this stage? Thank you.
Yes, I rather agree with Councillor Brooks. I think that there are a number of quite large multi-generational families living in that immediate area, and that this scheme does not cater for their potential needs. And I think that's regrettable, whatever the policy has to say about it. And my specific question, though, was, forgive me if I haven't quite understood this correctly, but it seems to me that the affordable housing is all concentrated in one block. And is this a good idea socially? Would it not lead to some forms of stigma or discrimination, potentially, between the residents of the area? It seems to me that it might well, and that a more scattered approach might be better, and surely possible still to manage quite okay.
I'll probably helpfully explain that. So and representing Clarion Housing Group. So we manage 125,000 homes across the country, and we have all kinds of, and a lot of them large-scale communities, a bit like this one, which we're wishing to deliver in Leeds. What we find is the most challenging projects, most challenging schemes we have, especially around antisocial behaviour, etc., is where we have pepper potting. And we have a large amount of our projects are generally in towns and city centres. And I would say around about 60% of what we own is in what I would call, as we would now call apartments, flatted schemes. Yeah. So from a management perspective, we work incredibly closely. I lead the development business, but work incredibly closely with our colleagues, and our entire business is focused on delivering affordable housing. Give you a perspective, in the last financial year, we delivered 2,300 new homes. 86% of them were affordable across the country. Yeah. We need to work with our management colleagues to make sure we deliver the best outcome for the community. So the rented is in a block, yeah, but we know that's the best way to manage it. We know that's the best way to avoid what I call antisocial systems. It's the best way we can then design the buildings for robustness, because the challenge we all have is assets, especially in the legacy organisations. We do have what I would call a level of mixed community where we don't differentiate at all in shared ownership. So if you look at our shared ownership product across the country, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between our shared ownership and our private sale. And we mix shared ownership with the private sale. So there's a what I would call a mix where we see there is the right operational demand and need, but we're very focused on making sure that we avoid all those challenges that we all have, unfortunately, around social housing and social housing provision. And we all know care budgets are being cut and everything else. And that means we take on a bigger responsibility, which we're happy to do. But all of that comes with management and also comes with all the challenges that come from it. So I'm hoping I'm answering that. But this is a very much focus from the Housing Association. And we're not the only ones. This is very, very similar if you talk to a lot of the larger associations across the country, especially who have high-rise and multi-family homes. This is the way that we generally go down the route of actually managing it significantly and successfully for the community. But you will not be able to tell the difference between that rented block, the shared ownership block, or the private sale block from a perspective at all when you are stood in that street. And we are purposely designed this as a community to be very mixed. That was the brief at the start of this scheme for Broadway and Malyon. It was about putting employment in there and everything else. This isn't a housing estate. This is about creating a community. And that's how we've gone about this. And that's by a lot of experience and a lot of pain we've taken over the years.
Thank you, Chair. If I can just add to that, members, we've taken on board, as officers, we've taken on board the matter about management of the affordable housing. But we've also noted that of the 11 residential apartment blocks, 5 will be owned. The affordable housing will be in 5 of those blocks, owned and managed by Clarion Homes. So whilst we're not getting the detailed pepper potting of affordable housing in each and every block, what we are getting is integration throughout the site. It's not just one block. I think you mentioned, Councillor Carter, it was one block. It's actually 5 of the 11 blocks. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Can I just, come back in, just to actually, we are going to retain the long-term legacy for this entire project. So it's not just owning the blocks. We will ultimately oversee the entire estate management, and we will have the custodianship of this entire project. So even where we sold private sale units in private sale blocks, the whole landscaping and the legacy of the organisation will be managed by Clarion in perpetuity.
Thank you. Is that okay, Councillor Galway? Okay, moving on then. Councillor Nash, please, Liz.
Something quite different. Looking at it from the heritage perspective, it isn't a conservation area and there are no listed buildings there. But I was stuck in traffic on the Kurtzel Road last night, and of course one has got time to look around one. And I think it was the former Imperial Picture House, although I couldn't be quite sure. And although I could not say it was worthy of listing, it was certainly a distinctive and very pleasant building to look at, especially when the rest of Kurtzel Road is semi-derelict. So I've got two questions, and one would follow on from the other. Firstly, is there any way possible that you could keep perhaps the facade? The facade comes right up to the pavement edge on Kirksall Road. I'm not going to stick at that, but if you could look at it, I think it would improve the attractiveness of the development as a whole. And the second question relates to what is known as the sheds, the food shop and the food hall, which is in the middle of the site as a hub. Could you not use the design of the Imperial Picture House on these sheds? Because if it was the Imperial, it has an apex roof, but quite attractive and different fenestration. So I'll leave that with you.
From a design perspective, I mean, it's a good observation, I think, in terms of if we could link the two, and happy to have a look at that. As you say, I mean, we're familiar with the building you mentioned, of course. I would say one of the things we are doing is actually reusing some of the bricks actually from the development in those sheds, as you say, to sort of promote sustainable reuse of materials, but also the quality of the age of those bricks as well is something quite beautiful. So from that side, yeah, we can certainly look at that. Yeah.
Sorry, I'll just add one. So I think it's an interesting point. I've been in that building quite a few times recently, and I think knowing the history of it, we all got excited that we were going to find something when we went in, given its historic use. Sadly, we didn't. We did have a heritage impact assessment carried out on the building, and that sort of backed up what we were able to see for ourselves, that there wasn't anything there of heritage value as far as that assessment was concerned. But I think certainly, as Luke says, we'll look to try and incorporate some of those features if we can. But yeah, I sort of share the sort of the thought process.
Well, thank you, Liz. That was a good question to bring before us. Moving on, Peter, please. You're next.
Thanks, Chair. I'll come round to my question. I'll do a little bit of a comment first, if you don't mind, because it leads on usefully. But I quite like the townhouses in and amongst the big buildings. It's a big development, and it at least looks like something that may have arrived organically rather than something that has had all the buildings plonked in one place. So I quite like that, and it adds to the mix. And I guess around the idea of 3-bed, we have been quite insistent on this panel recently of having 10% 3-bed as our very lowest, and I think that's where we're always wanting to be. I appreciate there's more in the outline development, but I wouldn't mind seeing more of those townhouses to add up to it. As well, I like the sheds, the warehouses, because having lived just across the road from here, I've visited some of the venues like Open Source Arts, and I've had some good evenings out in my life in a shed in the end of industrial Kirkstall. But that leads on to the other thing I've spent a lot of time doing in a shed in industrial Kirkstall is digging out sludge from the floods in 2015. I noticed that I was getting there, yeah, to my question. I just wondered, obviously we have got the objections there, and there's some notes in terms of the fact that we think we can work through the objections on the flooding. But I wonder if, probably a question for officers, we could just ask around the risk to flooding of this site, and then the risk of this site causing more of a flood risk in the wider Kirkstall area, given recent history.
Peter, Stephen.
Thanks, Chair. In terms of risk to the site itself, I think the Environment Agency are content that the modelling that's been done won't affect the residences, because none of the residences are on ground floor level, and the actual floor levels will be high enough for the new FAS wall to protect it. The outstanding issue that we do have with the Environment Agency relates to hydraulic modelling, and it's relating to the residual risk to third parties. That modelling still needs to be done. It's considered that, generally speaking, it's unlikely to cause a significant problem. We just don't know exactly the nature of the problem and what mitigation is required. So the further work that needs to be done really is about the modelling and then the subsequent mitigation. It's not really to say that there would be an in principle risk that would affect the whole development. So in that sense, that's why we're asking to be able to continue these discussions with the Environment Agency and to make sure that modelling is done, and to get the objection from the agency lifted, and then that will show that there's enough mitigation for that residual risk if it's required.
Thank you, Stephen.
Chair,
Okay,
sorry,
Peter.
could I just add to what Stephen's just said there, because I think it's a really good point. We've been working incredibly hard with the Environment Agency, and it's not an insignificant challenge that everybody's been facing into, particularly given the flooding that we saw earlier this year, which has changed the way or some of the work that we've had to do whilst we've been in planning. So prior to Christmas, we thought we'd solved the problem, and then after Christmas, we find that we've got a new set of problems. And I think, it is important and incumbent on everybody to make sure that we've done all of that work and we satisfy ourselves that there is no net harm, both to the site or to anybody else. And there's a couple of important points. The first is that all the living accommodation is at first floor level, and all the ground floor space is all defensible space. Once the FAS work is completed in spring next year, spring 2023, the site has 1 in 100 year plus climate change flood protection, and there's no net harm. That level of protection is then enhanced once the step 2 works for the flood alleviation scheme are completed the following year. So in some ways, we're caught in a period of time at the moment where if we were having this conversation in 12 months, we wouldn't be having the same conversation. It would be completely different because the flood wall would have been completed. So what we're really dealing with here is satisfying ourselves that the temporary condition that exists between now, perhaps on the award of planning, and us starting on site doesn't cause any net harm. And that's the work that the Environment Agency are working through at the moment. And that's the little challenge that we're trying to sort of face down with them and colleagues in planning.
Thank you for that additional information. Moving on, David.
Well, most of my questions have been said, but coming back to the shed, and it's only a little quirky one about the shed. Those of us who once went to Spinningfields at Manchester will remember a shed that was built in the middle of a development that was actually an old outhouse from Kent, or the outside of it was. That was made into a bar. Have you thought about actually doing something quirky? I'm not saying say buy an old outhouse and stick that on the outside like happened there, but doing something quirky. If you do something quirky, it'll fit in a lot better.
I think that's brilliant. I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. I think one of the things we're trying to do is obviously get a scheme for Leeds and the people of Leeds, and yeah, I believe they like a drink. So no, I think we are going to work very closely with developing meanwhile use and the new startups in those spaces to make them exciting for the people in the local community and the people that want to move there as well. So yeah, all those sorts of things. I mean, I think the key for us here today is about creating spaces we can adapt to those needs, which is really what we're looking for in the planning.
And I'll add to that from a developer perspective. I think I said earlier, we want to create a community here. So the flexibility in the space is really important to us. We're talking to a number of people around bringing some art and, as we call it, maker spaces, but startups into this scheme. It's really important that this is a brownfield site that has stood really empty for about 30 years, that we're going to want people to want to live there. And that's just not about building houses. It's about creating something that one becomes a little bit of a destination, because that creates the footfall and that creates the desire for people to want to live in our project. So that having the flexibility in the spaces, and I've been to Spinningfields and I've actually drank in that place. We want to create that type of atmosphere out at Kirkstall and create a community here that actually people are going to really want to belong to, because that's our long-term legacy as an organisation. And we're going to be looking after this forever. So it has to be a success. We're not an in and out developer. We're a long-term asset holder. So it has to be a success for us.
All good ideas coming from it. Please don't make it a Wetherspoon. We'll probably just... Okay, I've got Neil now, please. Councillor Walshaw.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Due to my putting my hand up lamentably, like most of the questions I wanted to ask have been covered. So I do have a comment when the time's come, Chair. But I say to the applicants is, a lot of this is very good, but I think Councillor Brooks is right in that a strong community needs more long-term residents. And long-term residents, Chair, I think come from more three-bedroom properties. So I know this is a defer and delegate, but as a strong signal to you, Chair, and to Mr. Carr there, I think we do need to see, as Councillor Carlill's raised, a more emphasis on three-bedroom properties with the desire to get up to our 10%. And I think that's quite important, because this location of this site has been derelict for 30 years, and boy, do we want to see it come forward. And this is an excellent proposition, which I'll go into in the comment section. But this site it's a little bit country and it's a little bit rock and roll in the sense of its location by the city centre, but also in part of Kirkstall as a community peripheral to the city centre. So I just think perhaps a slight frame of reference shift from the applicants will get us to where we need to be, Chair. So I'll just park that for now and I'll come back in appropriate time with comments.
So, sorry, Councillor Walshaw, I missed that at the end.
Can we just work on the principle that it was excellent? Right. What I was saying, Chair, Daljit, was that I was saying to the developers, look, this site, Councillor Brooks is right in that this site fits into a part of the community, an established community in Kirkstall, but it's Burley, names. But yes, you're right, Burley. Apologies, Councillor Brooks. Burley, right. But it's also peripheral to the centre, and indeed we think of it as almost part of the city centre, don't we? So what I was suggesting is that Councillor Brooks is right, and then we need to be strongly thinking about achieving more three-bedroom properties, because that, to my mind, that builds a stronger community that the applicants undeniably want to build. Three-bedroom properties, yeah. So three-bedroom properties. No, I did. Anyway, I've said, well, because you weren't listening the first time, Chair, I said three-bedroom properties several times. You remember the first time I had to say all of this. So my second time of having to say all this, let's say that 3 THREE bedroom properties build stronger, longer-lasting communities. And that's a strong tier to yourself and to Daljit and Mr. Carr regarding that. And then we'll come back for comments.
Just, sorry. Yeah. Councillor Walshaw, I take it as a comment, and obviously the panel will be entitled to their view very shortly on this matter. We have negotiated very hard with the developers. They're aware of the policy position and the preferred target. They're aware of the recent discussions members have had on other sites, and I agree with you that perhaps we need to revisit our policy and make it more distinct. So that it's less of a broad brush approach and it looks at local character in more detail. But that is going to take some time. Adam can add to that, but we are working on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with what Daljit said, and I think the good news here is that we don't need to wait for a new policy, because we're going to be commissioning a new strategic housing market assessment this year, hopefully this summer, and that should provide us with a lot more localized data about the concern that Councillor Brooks raised about what is the needs in certain areas rather than the more broad brush approach which the SHMA currently takes while looking at HMCA. So it looks at the city centre, it looks at the inner areas, which are obviously very complex areas when you take them as a whole. But actually, when we look more specifically and more local, based on things like super output areas, we can perhaps generate far better, more richer data on that. And the benefit of the current wording of the policy is that it makes clear that what we should be striving for is an appropriate mix. And that's what's in the wording of the policy. So with an up-to-date SHMA, which I would hope would be in place come, say, autumn time or perhaps winter this year, I think we'll be in a far better position to know what an appropriate mix is for more bespoke, localized areas. But obviously that information isn't in front of you today, and it's not going to be available for a number of months. So I don't think it's necessarily data that can be relied upon, because it doesn't exist. But just to kind of confirm the position on where we'd like to get to in terms of this policy, a lot of monitoring data to show that in terms of its effect, we've had some successes, but also some frustrations in terms of what it's delivering on the ground. We're very mindful of that and recognise comments that members have made over the last few years on those points, and are obviously looking at, as part of the local plan update 2, how we can improve that policy to make it more robust.
Thank you for that, Adam. Any final questions, or shall we go on to comments? Question?
Can I ask you a quick question in relation to that? And what we've been asked to do this afternoon. Now, it strikes me we've been asked this afternoon to agree a principle in 2 phases. Given what you said about the housing needs assessment, and it's not just in Burley where there's a problem, there's an issue because it crops up on all the plans panels. Could we, are we going to be asked today to agree, in effect, the housing needs assessment for the entirety of the site? Or can we simply say we accept the housing needs assessment for the section of the site, the first section of the site that we're talking about, but we would wish to review the second section of the site when the new policy has been put together, which you tell us will be September, so it's not exactly a long-term delay. Is it possible for us to do that?
I think, Councillor Gamble, that there is a difference between the detailed element of the site and the outline, but because of the wider context of viability, the amount of affordable housing that's being generated, and the other matters that have been raised so far in the meeting, we are being asked to agree to 10% on the outline phase, subject to a housing needs assessment. So the answer is yes and no. It's not a complete parking of the outline phase to be looked at later. There's a commitment by the developer to relook at the mix for the outline phase with a view to increasing that, uplifting that to 10% 3 beds, but that will be subject to further housing needs assessment at that time. And I think it's a well accepted rule in planning. We have to deal with the application before us at the time. We're not in a position where we can have a moratorium on these applications, even though it's a short time until September. The spending of that money, as members will have noted from Homes England, which has been committed by Homes England, is time critical, and members will have noted that from the report. So the reason why we bring this to you is because you need to make a decision on what's before us. Thank you, Chair.
I think we all appreciate that, Chair. We've been doing this a while. I think we know where we are. It's just, if I may put it into terms that perhaps I understand, what you're saying to us is, in effect, when we come to phase 2, at that point, the developer will have reviewed the housing mix in relation to whatever the housing need assessment is at that time. Okay, so if the housing need assessment is different, or are you saying up to a maximum of 10%? Ah, right. So if the housing needs assessment said we need 97% 3-bedroom housing, it wouldn't make much difference. I don't think it will actually, but I think what, we all have these concerns, don't we? Because we've raised this issue. Well, we almost raise it every month, don't we? Because we do feel that we are losing the opportunity to get larger properties within the centre. And I'm trying to work out a mechanism where we can look at this site, the other half of this site, in relation to the policies that apply at the time they start building.
Perhaps Mike can clarify, but the condition that's in the report is it for a minimum of 10% or for up to 10%?
I think we just need to look back at the conditions and just absolutely check the wording down, Jim. But I think what we've said is that we would look in the outline element of the application at delivering 10% 3 beds as part of that application under reserved matters. So we appreciate all the points that are being made about 3 beds. I think I'd come back to the point I made earlier on in terms of the challenge that we face. We appreciate the need to deliver more 3 beds. But we also appreciate the challenge that there is at the moment of delivering more affordable homes and the challenge of bringing forward a brownfield brownfield site in this particular location. There's a balance that we've had to try and strike amongst all of those things and many other factors. And we hope that what we've done at this point in time is strike the right balance that allows us to get on and start delivering a significant first phase with 230 affordable homes. And then we can revisit the mix on the outline element of the application in due course.
John, please.
Yes, Chair, just to clarify the position, condition 57 does talk about a minimum of 10%. And obviously the final figure is subject to the housing needs assessment. So that doesn't preclude going beyond 10%. It may be closer to 20% by the time that assessment's been carried out. I think the key issue, as has been mentioned today, is really to make a decision on the scheme that we've got in front of us, notwithstanding that additional provision that may be coming forward at a later date, and to look at the overall benefits in terms of the level of affordable that's coming forward, a new bridge over the canal, the large green space areas. It's the overall package and that balance that as officers we've decided or determined for ourselves in making a recommendation is definitely in favour of going forward with this scheme, which may be actually unique. It may be a unique opportunity given the funding levels and the issue around that's time critical. So that's where we are with this application at the moment. Clearly listen to members' views, and we've done that. And as previously mentioned, the 3-bedroomed issue has been large and centre in our thoughts over the last few months, because that's reiterated at every meeting. But specifically for this application on this panel, that's the conclusion that we've reached. The overall balance is a significant benefit to the city as a whole.
Thanks, John. That clarification was very helpful. Can we go on to comments? I have you down first, Neil, so you can fire away. Keep your hand up till again.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate you bringing me in first. So I think the applicants have discovered this panel's rightful obsession with 3-bedroomed properties. So let's instead go on to the good stuff. I think this is an excellent application in all but the 3-bedroomed issue, and I think there's a way through that, as the officers and members have outlined this afternoon. I like your sheds. I think it's a nudge to industrial heritage. I like the colour palette of the buildings, the variety. I think they'll age well in the Leeds skyline. I think it provides much needed homes. We've perhaps should consider just how much better this application is from some of the other previous attempts at this site, which were pretty bad. As if anyone cares to look at our YouTube channel, they'll if it goes back that far, we'll see some drubbings that applications got, and this one's not received that. We've focused on one particular issue. I think the phasing is good and welcome. There is a development, which I won't name names, that's not that far away, which phase 1 has been built, and it says, come spend £300,000 on a flat to look over a sea of gravel for the next 10 years. It's not great, and your phasing doesn't lead to that, which is excellent. particularly pleased with the approach to energy insofar as much where we are with policy. The cycle hub's a good start, a good feature. And I think, Chair, at an appropriate juncture, I'd be prepared to move the recommendations. Thanks.
Thank you, Neil. Caroline, please.
Thank you. I agree with Neil's assessment of the scheme. I think it's a good overall scheme. And I'm encouraged by the careful consideration of the interplay between what happens at ground level and what happens at high-rise level. I'm encouraged by that. I did have a question in my own head about the 4 townhouses, but now I've heard the rationale. I like the townhouse idea, and I like the fact that you're bringing different types of residential accommodation onto the one site. I think it's an excellent use of brownfield, and it's the direction that we should be going in. I haven't had my chance yet to put my oar in on the 3-bedroom thing, so I am going to take the opportunity now, Chair. I think that our city centre is changing and needs to change. I think we've all come to an agreement that we don't want everybody to live on the outer rim and nobody to live happily in the middle. And in order to create stable communities centrally, we do need 3-bedroom accommodation in the centre. And we need to be serious about that on panel. We need to start putting our foot down about that in panel in good time, not sort of now when it's before us and there's a decision to be made. That change won't happen unless we make it change. If we always base our expectation about need on what currently is the need or on what currently is the style of living, then we won't change as a city. We've got to move forward. We need to attract families to the city centre, families who want to live comfortably and creatively in the city centre. If we don't create places where they can do that, they will continue not to live there. So I think that's a really important point for the future, really important. I would love to hear more about the formal and informal play areas, a particular interest of mine. And I see that the consultation on the planting and landscaping has resulted in a very positive paragraph in the report there. So I'm assuming that is of the high quality that's described there, which is excellent, and a good amount of green space. So I do think it's a good scheme, but I do think we have to grasp this nettle of how we're going to create family environments in the city centre, Chair.
Thank you, Caroline. Councillor Garthwaite, please.
Yes, thank you. I agree with a great deal of, well, all of what's been said about 3-bedroom housing, so I won't repeat that again. I like the landscaping a lot from what I've seen of it. I like the attitude towards the mixed play space, formal, informal, and I like the flexible space in what we've been calling the sheds. But I would say that I think while I agree with it being flexible, there is a limit to that, in that I know some of our residents will not meet in a room that has a bar in it, even if it's closed. And that should not be. We can't be precluding that possibility. You know, it wouldn't be suitable as a prayer room, for example. It wouldn't be suitable even as a residents' meeting or an educational activity. So that would be a limit. And then if it is to be a nursery rather than a creche, there are also safety considerations that apply. I'm sure you've thought of all this from your nodding, but I do feel quite strongly that we need to take all members of the community into account rather than just focusing on 1 or 2 and then thereby discriminating against the rest. Thank you.
We don't usually, but I don't mind a couple of words if it's important to the issue.
I think it's really important. I think the bit you said about is the multicultural use of our space is really important to us as an organisation. So ultimately what we're going to have here is it will be what we call the Williamson Community Centre, who is our founder of our organisation, which will be a multi-faith space for anybody to use. So we won't discriminate about anybody in this, and that will be part of that flexible space. So there might be one end where it's actually food and beverage and everything else, but there will be a space there that will be for the wider community to use for birthday parties, whatever they want to, but anybody can use it and there'll be nothing to offend anybody in that. And that's part of what we do. And we have that on our estates across the country. Been doing that for over 100 years.
Thank you for that. That was good. Moving on, Peter, please.
Thanks, Chair. I agree with a lot of what's been said. I think a lot of the developments we've seen have been developments that don't necessarily create a place, but fit in the space. Whereas actually looking at this, and I don't think I've said it on any, and I don't say it lightly. This does look like a village or a neighbourhood and a community of people, and that's come through the variety of the designs on the buildings, the differences in heights. I like this sheds. There's a lot of nice sheds out in Farsley if you want to visit our new brewery in one, and all of those. And this looks really good. And living just across, the road from here on the Burley Lodges for a while. We haven't really talked about the landscaping today, but living there, what you miss quite often is the possibility of having a traffic-free walk along with the dog, along the river, or with greenery around you, or to sit in a public square without cars going past you. And I think this helps to create that for residents, because many times I've walked along Kirksall Road thinking, why can't I just get through that big dense industrial block there to where there is a river to take my mind off the inner city? And I think that's a really useful thing that this develops, and I think it's done really well. So I think there is the difficulty with the 3 beds that we always want to see more, but overall on balance, I think this development has a lot of positives to it, and I wouldn't want to see that hold this one back.
Thank you, Peter. Graham, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I suppose there's been an awful lot said about everything other than design here, and we talked about design early on at the beginning of the meeting. And one thing that I said, and everybody said, yeah, great, is that we want to, in the future, people to look at what we've passed and say that we've improved the place. And honestly and truly, I don't know whether it's the way that the images are presented to us, but honestly and truly, I don't think they do themselves any credit at all in the presentation of what they want to build. These huge lowering buildings, people might like the sheds, and I've just been making notes as we go along. They look to me very much like we've all seen road movies where the car pulls up outside one of these places and they go inside and there's an empty bar and sort of things like that. It's that sort of place, which, I don't know, somehow doesn't relate. It's almost like pulling something people-sized into a landscape of buildings that are far from people-sized. So I think that something more could be done to make the site as a whole relevant to itself, as opposed to buildings admittedly for uses, but not designed as a whole. One of the gentlemen referred to exciting spaces. Yes, it's some gorgeous open space in this place, but it's, as I say, it's totally surrounded by these, and lowering is the only word or lowering is the only word I can think of about these buildings, looming over you as you use these exciting spaces. You know, we've done a lot of work on these sites on the riverbank and canal bank, and we have got some really nice designed places to look forward to. I honestly and truly, I think this lets down that particular bit of riverbank. I'm not saying anything about its suitability for its purpose, just my pet subject, how it looks. You know, I leave other people to organise what they do inside and how they get on inside buildings. I want the buildings to look right, and I don't think these do. So it's with a bit of disappointment that I look at my last plans panel item, and it's not one that I can say, yes, great, I love it, because I don't. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Graham. David, next, please.
I generally support the application. I've got a lot of difficulty with the breakdown of housing. I mean, not wishing to contradict Caroline, I don't see this as being part of city centre. I think it's part of that donut that goes round the city centre where we need family homes. And all of us who are touching on that donut know how many people want rented accommodation in that area. And I don't think that this scheme delivers on that. I mean, what we're talking about, the socially rented, there's 109 one bed, 58 two beds and no three beds. And we were quite right with your questioning about that. It is not on. Whether we can do what about it, as I say, is a matter for future, really. But as I say, as far as development goes, I'm quite happy with it. I think what needs to be done, and it's like the devil's in the detail, isn't it? If you can get it right, so that those townhouses fit in, if you can get those sheds to be that, and I wouldn't, and the one that Councillor Cardill was talking about, I hope it ain't like that one because it's very expensive. And he knows as well, because he told me. But the thing is that we've got to get that right. And if you get that right, it'll work. If you don't get it right, it won't. I'd have liked to see a walkthrough. That would have been really helpful. That would have done that. But in general, I'm supportive. But as I said, I'm disappointed about the housing mix. Okay.
Dan, did I see your hand up? With flurry of hands, I wasn't quite sure.
Oh, you did indeed, Chair.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. I have to say, I never realised that Councillor Carlo was such an expert on shed leisure. So that's been truly enlightening. Looking at the sheds, I actually like the sheds. One of my concerns about them, and it actually ties in something that Councillor Latty has spoken to, which is about the design. And actually, we've got a lot of high-rise around there that are all going to be looking down on what is actually a very, very hideously boring roof and roof feature. And actually, there's a lot of height about there. And when you look at it, it's a very plain, dull, and actually a lot of, I won't say classic, a lot of industrial architecture did look at roof and actually make roofscape more interesting, broke it up a bit. And that's actually something that I think really could be done there, particularly given that actually it's your customers. Fundamentally, you say, look at this, fine, it's not a sea of gravel, but it is a very, very dull as ditchwater roof. So I make that comment. I am as frustrated as colleagues actually around the 3-bed piece, because it's something as a panel we say repeatedly, and actually there's a policy there. There is a policy there, and it frustrates me that officers seem to suggest to us that we should not be being more robust about the policy that we have there. I don't know how we make it more robust. Candidly, it's there in black and white, and I look to, certainly for the next 2 weeks, the group opposite who are in administration who could, vote through a much stronger policy, because we can't. There is, I believe, in 2 weeks, I'm told. I've heard rumours. But in all seriousness, it's I hear colleagues, irrespective of where we may sit in the chamber, all say the same thing on this issue. And yet it should not be beyond the wit of woman or man or anybody else to deal with this. So I find it hugely frustrating. Overall, I think it is a good application. I am prepared to be supportive of it, but I do hope that officers will take note of the points we have made as they take this through the defer and delegation process. I know they're not. They don't mean it. They're not going to listen at all, but they'll pretend. But if we could perhaps do slightly more than the usual and really push. This needs to be far closer. We recently allowed something through with 10% 3-bed, and we said that's our marker in the sand that apparently is being washed over by the River Air in this particular instance. Thank you. Well, I say I am prepared to second at the appropriate moment, but I do so with those comments and reservations. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Dan. Kaylee, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think just very quickly, the reason that I bang on so much about the 3-bed thing is because I have a lot of families living in my ward, in the city centre ward, one of two, living in 1-2-bed flats with 2 and 3 kids. So there is a need there in the area. This is why I bang on about it so much. I feel sitting on this panel that I would be letting people down if I don't mention it, if I don't fight for it. And I'm really grateful for the other panel members for backing me up on this, because I know that it's not just my ward. It's just that I feel it a bit more acutely because of there's so many jobs and so many opportunities in the ward. So I just wanted to get that out of the way before I go on to the good parts of the development. So the sheds, I think, are actually quite good. I agree that the roofs might need something doing to them, maybe greening up a nice big tree if possible. Yeah, on the roof. Yeah, that'd be good, wouldn't it? Some sheep. Exactly. Bring back the sheep on roofs. In where? Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was. Now it's in my belly. I think the big strip of greenery, the big new walkway park is going to be an absolute boon to the local community. And yeah, I think it's overall a good development. It's just the housing mix issue really does get my goat. So thank you.
Thank you, Kaylee. Colin, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad I raised the issue of the sheds because it's kept us going for at least 20 minutes. I get thoroughly depressed, actually, because we sit here week on, week in, week out, wringing our hands about, in this case, 3-bedroom. And every single person here has said, actually, we don't think there's enough 3 bedrooms. And not one of us are prepared to say, but actually, we're going to turn it down because there aren't. So we all say it every time, and there we are. And I'll just say that because I find it depressing that we spend such a lot of time talking about it, but actually doing nothing about it. I appreciate we're going to pass this today, but I just want to raise one issue, and I'm glad I asked the question about the townhouses because I do understand what you're trying to do. Initially, as we said, there were 4, and you think that's an odd number. But looking at the drawing, I just have some concerns in relation to security because the townhouses seem to open out straight out onto the footpath shared surface. And I just wonder why there isn't any defensible space, even if it's just a set of railings, maybe a metre. And I would just ask, can we have a look at that? Because I'm not sure about how defensible those spaces are. The picture shows the cargo bike going past and a shady looking character in the corner there. I'm assuming he's going into the house, but you never know. But this is the time to get the security right, isn't it? We don't want to have a situation where, well, hopefully it's be a lively, it'll be an open space. There'll be people coming from all over Burley to walk through here and have a drink in a shed. So you know, there'll be a lot of people on that street, and I think it's important that the people who live in those maisonettes feel secure. Thank you, Chair.
You're not asking for a comment, but you certainly raised questions that officers will look at. Councillor Wadsworth, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the 3-bedroom thing, I think that I just hope this application does not become the benchmark. I hope that the previous one where we negotiated 10%, and I thought that was going to be our bottom line, I hope that is the benchmark. And I just hope that, well, shall I rephrase it? Members of the administration can sort of be guaranteed on our support on that. But you know, we are where we are, but this application on the 3-bedroom stuff just tend to take the mickey really out of 3 bedrooms, really. And Colin is right. We're not going to refuse it on that, but maybe we should. If we're really serious about 3 bedrooms, I'll leave that for other members to contemplate. This is a blocky scheme on design, and I do take what Councillor Latty says about very tall buildings, but we've got to remember it's high density. And they're always going to be blocky schemes when they're high density. And I think it probably shows more because we have some high density housing and very low density amenity space in the sheds. So I think that's where the differential shows more. I'm not saying it's bad, but it shows more. What I am pleased is, and I thought Councillor Gruen might have raised this, is the number of balconies that are on, and the number of balconies at high level, because we are told we can't have balconies at high level. It appears these are at high level. I appreciate the balconies we see on some of the images are only where the views are. We don't see any balconies where there aren't any views, and the balconies are not really for the view benefit. The balconies are to give people private open space should we ever return to what we were in 2 years ago, where people need private open space. So that's a good thing to see. The Riverside Park walkway is really good to see, and the additional crossing across the river is there. I just want to say I hope that we get all the niceties and don't end up with the blocky stuff without the niceties. And the townhouses, 4 in the first phase do look very odd, and so I would be very disappointed if we didn't get that continuation in the outline when it becomes detailed. Otherwise it will look hideous with just 4 in the old development. So I think it's something that the developer just needs to be aware of. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Liz, please.
Well, Chair, it may appear that I'm going to be a lone voice. Obviously, the 3-bedroom issue is something that I do support. But getting back to the sheds, which appears to be a minor matter, I do like to go out and have a drink and socialise with people. But quite frankly, as they are at the moment, they are boring. And there's no reason why they should be boring. And they do not relate to the development which is all around them. On page 8, you can see one of these sheds, which looks at odds with the blocky development of the rest of the area. And I do take the point that there's a lot of boring roof space that residents are going to have to look down on. I did suggest earlier on that they might have a look at the former Imperial Picture House, and at least the facades could be enlivened. But really, something does need to be done about them. It looks as though they've just been stuck in there as an afterthought. And I take Councillor Latty's point. In 50 years' time, somebody is going to say, who on earth agreed to that? Well, I hope that I'm not going to be counted in that. And overall, the scheme, I will be voting for it. But I do expect the officers and the developers to come back with something better than what's been given to us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Liz. I think that concludes comments. I think it's been very informative to developers sat around the table. The message has come over very, very clearly regarding 3 bedrooms. And just like to say to Colin, you will remember the time when we were only achieving 3% 3 bedrooms. And then we changed policy to 7. And we're now seeing very much 10% as a benchmark. So we have moved a fair way. We
Yeah,
have a long way to go, I
I
recognise.
know we
but-
had to be dragged,
Sorry, I'm
screaming and
speaking, Colin.
kicking to get to that
Colin,
level.
I'm speaking. We have made comments that we don't think 10% is enough, and we will continue to do that. But we have moved a long way, and I'll let you make that comment because I didn't want to chop you off. No? Is there somebody prepared to move it? Neil, and a seconder, please. Al. Okay. Did I hear you? Sorry?
It's okay, it's fine.
It's fine. Okay, so we have had a mover and a seconder. Nothing has changed off my personal site or screen. Okay. All those in favour of the recommendation, please show. Okay. Thank you. Those against? And an abstention is one. By the way, I was in favour as well. One abstention, so that's clearly passed. Can I thank the developers for their helpful comments? I think it's helped the panel a great deal, and I quite like the idea of the changes we will see to it, whether the sheds are still there or there's something else. But I did like the idea of Councillor Nash talked about the Imperial Cinema, which maybe could be incorporated. So something to consider, and take it back to panel and see if they agree with that. But thank you for your presentation, and thank you for your patience while we had a small presentation at the front. Wish you a good afternoon. The next meeting, members, is the 19th of May. So safe journey home. It'll probably be a lot busier than this one was, so be prepared. Thank you.